Cara. Today, I am delighted to have you here to meet my friend Dani Pettrey. And some of you may have been here for an episode we had a while ago with her talking about one of her other books. But this one, y'all, you've got to run out and get one wrong move because let me tell you, I am in the middle of a deadline as we're recording this, and I should not be reading other books, but I could not put this one down. I literally kept coming back to it and coming back to it. It is so good. So, Dani, before we get sucked into talking about the book, why don't you tell people real quickly about yourself? And then I want to dig into One Wrong Move and talking all about your writing and these characters. Oh my goodness, it was so good.
Thank you so much. You're so sweet. Thank you for having me back. I'm excited to be back with you. For those who don't know me, I write romantic suspense and thrillers for Bethany House. My husband and I just celebrated 31 years, and we have two grown daughters, two son-in-laws, two grandsons, and a 200-pound Newfoundland who thinks
That's
he's
a
a
lot of
lap
twos.
dog. It's a lot of
Yeah.
twos. That's what we said. Yes, and my youngest just got married in April, so my oldest has the two. So my youngest is saying, I want two. Two's a good number. I said, well, that just goes with our family. So lots of
Absolutely.
twos.
Well, and a 200-pound dog who thinks he's a lap dog, that's a
Yeah,
lot.
it is a lot. He's very heavy. If he puts his head on you alone, it's like, woof, he's a heavy dog. So,
Yeah.
and I'm up three. We have a three-story house, and I'm on the top floor. He's on the bottom, and I can still hear him with doors closed barking. So hopefully he doesn't try to get in on the podcast too much. He's got this
Yeah.
deep woof. So
Oh my goodness. But pets are great. They make life
yeah,
worth living. So if we
they
hear them,
do.
it's
Yeah,
all good.
yeah,
So let's talk One Wrong Move. And when I
sure.
say I inhaled it, I'm
Oh,
not kidding. It was
thank you.
fantastic. And one of the things I love about your books, Dani, is you've always got a really strong suspense thread.
Hmm.
But then you also have a really strong romance thread. And there are some books that are billed as romantic suspense that I would actually call romantic mystery. And
Hmm.
this is definitely more the suspense. There's kind of
Hmm.
a not it's not romantic thriller, but it's definitely romantic
Yeah,
suspense. There's a
yeah.
ticking element to it, and they've got things they have to figure out quickly. But the romance in this
Mhm.
one, and you kind of have two going. One's comes all the
Yep.
way, the other, I'm
Not
hoping is book
quite.
two, maybe book three. I don't
Maybe.
know. But how did you decide on this setting, these characters? I'm always curious with book one because
Sure.
as authors, sometimes getting that initial what if is often the
Yes.
hardest part. So this
Right.
is the first in Jeopardy Falls. So how did you come up
Yes.
with the initial what if for One Wrong Move?
Sure. Setting wise, you mentioned New Mexico. I lived in New Mexico for 7 years. I went to high school, started college, met my husband, lived there my first year of marriage. And I thought it'd be super fun to set a book series there. The what if part, yeah, it's funny because people have asked me this, and I'm not exactly sure where I came up with it, but I thought it would be really interesting to have a family of private investigators who were raised by con men, and they were pulled into cons as kids, and they've gotten out since and come to know the Lord, and or most of them have. And they wanted to do something to kind of combat what they grew up doing. And so now they focus on busting cons and heists and scams. So this book in particular focuses on Christian, who is a security expert, and he busts heists. He gives a security system analysis to museums and art thefts, just because of some interesting stuff in his background, which I won't bring up too much. But yes, so I thought it would be super fun to have a series of heists. I've always wanted to write a heist caper, and I know we were chatting, and you have books with art in them, so we'll have to chat that. But yeah, it kind of came about from the setting and then the family, and then thinking what area the different PIs would specialize in.
Yeah, and I loved that because it does have a little bit of a heist feel to it
Mhm.
without going Ocean's 11
Correct.
or Thomas Crown Affair, which it
Right.
would be really easy to kind of tip over into
Hmm.
that, but
Yes.
it doesn't. Um, but at the same time, it has those flavors of you do have this backstory of they
Hmm.
grew up with these con parents who were
Hmm.
out there doing things and they've broken from that. And they've got this mentor character
Yes.
who's kind of in the background as like the Batman guy in the cave, the guy in
Yep.
the chair.
Yep.
Um, and he's kind of interesting. So how
Thank
did you
you.
even come up with like the idea of the agency that the one brother's going to buy and then everyone else is going to come into, and Riley's
Sure.
her own personality, and yet they're all so distinctive and they all come together in this book, but it's still Christian story.
Yeah. So I knew that the oldest brother was the first to become a PI, and I knew he needed to work for somebody else to begin with because he wasn't just going to open a business without kind of getting his mentorship in there. And so he started with Grayson, who is the mentor character you're talking about. And for reasons unknown, for now, Grayson decided to sell the practice to Deckard, and Deckard brought his siblings on. And from that point, I wasn't planning to have Grayson really to have this part in it. It was kind of backstory. And I started to kind of like him. And I was like, ooh, I'm going to put him in there. And he's going to have his own story and things going on. And so he's kind of one that I'm just playing with a little bit and having a lot of fun figuring him out.
He definitely, I could see where he'd be one of those characters that you think is just in the background, and then
Hmm.
he kind of raises his hand and goes, yeah, no, I
Right.
get my own book.
Right.
And
Yeah.
he'd better get his own book. I'm assuming he gets his own book.
He probably does.
Yeah, I just about bet money he does.
Yes.
But when you think about this, because there's a lot going on, and one of the things that's interesting about the way you write versus some other people is you write, I'm going to call it an ensemble cast, even though
Hmm.
you always have one character, one set of hero and heroine
Hmm.
who are predominant, but
Yes.
there's a very strong secondary
Hmm.
heroine or hero
Hmm.
and heroine. But
Yep.
then there's always like a third, like a tertiary. So it's like an ensemble cast going on.
Hmm.
Um, so how does that become like a challenge when you're writing a book
Sure.
like One Wrong Move?
Yes. It is tricky. I kind of started out doing that without really meaning to, and I've just kept continuing that. The biggest challenge is making sure the secondary thread, because it's secondary romance and mystery, that it doesn't overtake the primary thread, because I'll get so into both cases it almost like will start to equal out, and I'll need to rein back on the secondary one because yeah, it can overtake the main one, and I don't want like two complete stories fully in one book. I think that would be a little tricky. So trying to strike that balance is the challenging part.
Well, and I could see in this one where there were times the second
Hmm.
one really wanted to take over.
Yes,
And as an author, I bet it was a real challenge to pull back
it was.
because Hayden and Decker are really sympathetic characters where, as the writer in me was like, oh, I could see where I would want to just really dig into their
Yes,
story.
yes,
So how did you pull back, or
yes.
how do you know when is the time to say, nope, nope, you've got to go into the background now?
Sure. Yes. So I usually will do my initial draft with just everything in it. Like I just pour the whole thing out. And then it's during the revisions. I'll read through and go, oh, this is like 50-50. That can't work out that way. And I'll start looking where I can pull scenes or where I can narrow them down. Or there was actually a lot more of the secondary thread in my initial drafts. And I really did have to rein back in that. And also in the romance. I
Mm.
kind of went, pretty far with the romance going along. And then I thought, no, that's got to wait, or that's going to change and had a cut scene. So I probably cut a good 10,000, 15,000 words out of it just to settle down that secondary thread. But it's
So
hard.
did you cut them or did you save them for another book?
I saved them, so we'll
Yeah.
see. It won't be the same mystery if we get to them, but yes,
Yeah.
I when I cut stuff like that, I always save it because you just never know.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know about you, but I've learned that sometimes those become great reader treats for
Yes,
like, newsletter giveaways or things like that,
yes,
where I call it the hidden chapters or,
yes.
and then I'll be like, well, here's why I ended up cutting this chapter, or here's this scene that I really
Hmm.
loved, but it didn't fit in the book. And so
Right.
sometimes those can be little goodies too,
They
if they
are.
ultimately
That's
don't make it.
true. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm doing one for this book actually as a newsletter incentive of a deleted scene that'll be coming out in a little while. And yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. They are fun and readers get to see them. And, we wrote them, so we want to share them. And that's a great way
Yeah.
to do it.
Exactly. Even if it doesn't make it into a future book or something, you're like, it's
Right.
still kind of fun and it peels back the curtain
It
a little bit.
does.
And I want to read
Absolutely.
it
Yeah,
because,
I'll
I
make
like those.
sure. Yeah, I
Yeah.
had beta readers who went, "You cut that scene?" And I was like, I had to, and they're like, "No, you didn't." I said, "Yes, I did." I said, "But we'll make sure, I'll let you guys read it again." So it's funny, but it was part of the secondary that I had to trim down.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. I think that would be hard,
it
just
is.
because they are such strong secondary characters, not just kind of
Hmm.
supporting, but
Right.
actually, I could see them taking over.
Yeah.
So this book has so much going on because you've got insurance, you've got
Hmm.
art, you've got a cold case,
Hmm.
you've got just all these different threads going on. What was the most challenging part for you to research?
That would be the cold case. That took a lot of research. My oldest daughter, is getting her doctorate and she's worked a lot with like biomedical statistics and different things
Mm.
in that area. And so on the kind of this part of the science side, she was able to lend some stuff or, give me ideas of where to look for things. But I spent a lot of time studying like criminal profiles and DNA and how you process DNA and different ways you separate, and all of that. That took a ton of research. I was actually just putting it all into a box because I thought this might come in handy one day. And so I labeled it and put it in a box today of what it was. But
Yeah.
yeah, that took the most research.
Yeah, some of those where you're like the research, the technology could update by the next
Yes.
book, but at the same time, some of that
Mhm.
underlying, you know,
Yes.
the epithelial cells
Yep.
and all of that is still
Yes.
going to be the same. And
Right.
so,
Right. Absolutely. So yeah, I like to hang on to research that could possibly be used in the
yeah,
future.
yeah,
So yeah, I have it going all the way back to my first book, just research on different things. So
that's amazing. I remember, oh, of course, I'm going to forget her name, but Bride Most Begrudging.
Mhm. Oh yes. Was it
Oh,
Deanne?
yes, Deanne.
Deanne
Uh,
Gist.
she said she would have a box, like a banker's box for
Yeah.
each book.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's a lot of
Yeah,
boxes.
mine's not that big at all.
Yeah.
Mine's more like not quite a photo box, but like that size, just big enough to fit all the papers in it and
Yeah.
have
But
those for
each of hers
books.
is a different time period. And I'm like, well, if you're doing a different time period
That's
with a lot
true.
of books, you
That's a
would end up
lot of
with a
books.
lot.
Yes.
So, what are some of the main themes in One
Mhm.
Wrong Move when you think about um, the main, let's stick with the main thread,
Sure.
the main,
Yes.
hero and
Yes.
heroine. Is there like a theme that kind of came
Yes.
out as you were writing it that you're like,
Yeah.
I was surprised by this, or I guess when you go into the writing, do you know what the theme's going to be, or is it something that surprises you as you're going through edits and you're like, oh, I
Mhm.
didn't see this, but wow, it's really clear that this
Right.
is something that's kind of embedded.
Yes. No, I don't know my themes when I start. I figure them out during edits and I'll go, oh, that's what it was about. So
Yeah.
somewhere in the back of my head as I was writing different drafts, I was like, oh, it's going to be about like restoration and redemption. And I got done with it and I really feel like the theme was hope. You know,
Mhm.
hope for God's mercies being new every day, and just that hope on knowing God's going to bring you through each day you wake up and have breath in your lungs is a gift from God, and He's got that day in hand. And just that continual hope in Christ is really the theme that came out of it.
Yeah, and it's really beautifully told through the book.
Oh, thank you.
So when we think about writing, and you've been doing it for a while now,
Hmm.
and have won a lot of awards, you've got quite a following of readers. If you were going to go back to when
Hmm.
you were at the beginning
Hmm.
and you were going to tell younger Dani, who was
Hmm.
starting out on this journey, what's a piece of advice that you would give yourself?
That's great. Great question. I would say balance your time better. Like learn to
Yeah.
balance your time now, because when you sell, you think, oh, I just get to sit and write books, and it doesn't work that way. There's a whole other component. And I think if I had kind of figured that out in the beginning, and just really figured out a way to balance my time well between the writing part, the creative part, and then more of the social media and writing business and launch and all the other components, I think it would have been an easier transition for me. Just the fact that there's more to a writing career than just writing. So I think that would be what I would warn her about.
Well, and that's one of those things that we don't really necessarily think about.
No.
And we kind of talk about it
Mhm.
in conferences, but I think when you're chasing publication, you're
Mhm.
all you're focused on is writing and that contract and maybe a
Yes.
little bit of building a platform. But you're
Yes.
not thinking about oh,
No.
now I have to pay taxes and like
Right.
all the things they get the
Right.
next contract and all of that.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that we don't really talk about a lot is how do you handle setbacks and rejection and things like that
Mhm.
once you're published? Because it doesn't
Sure.
just stop once you have the first contract.
No, it doesn't. That's a really good point. I think that people exactly, they think that once you're published, you won't have to face that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, I don't know about you, but every book I write, I get super nervous. Like, are readers gonna like it?
Yeah.
Are there going to be good reviews? Or are there going to be bad reviews? Bad reviews still hurt when you read them, you know? I mean, there's still definitely setbacks. I mean, one year I had serious health issues, and so there were 2 years between my books, and I hadn't anticipated that. But, I have lupus, and it was really flared, and we had to kind of go with that schedule. And so, yes, there are definitely challenges, and rejections still happen. I think that it's it's the love of the story that helps me push through,
Yeah.
because even if, let's say, I wasn't selling anymore, I still would not be able to not write, which, sorry,
Mhm.
double negative. But I mean, it's if I don't write for, like, we go on vacation, I'm great. But if I don't write for like a couple weeks, I get really antsy. I just,
Mhm.
and so I know it's the love of the writing that kind of helps me push through hard times or, challenges or anything like that.
Yeah, and it's kind of like that deep desire. So
Yes.
when did that first kind of develop for you? When did you
Hmm.
first know that, wow, I think I want to be a writer?
Right. So when I was younger, I wrote a lot of like stories or parts of stories. And in high school, I did some poetry for like we had a fiction magazine in my high school. We were
Oh,
really
cool.
art focused. We had an amazing theater program. Neil Patrick Harris was actually in our theater program when I went
Oh,
to
wow.
high school. And yeah, Freddie Prince Jr. went there. It's just interesting. But they had a fiction magazine. So I wrote some short stories and poetry for that. Didn't really think anything of it. And then I got really sick with my second daughter. And when I was recovering for a good 6 months, I read all the
Mm.
time. And somewhere along the way of reading, I was like, I think I want to write. I want to learn how to write. And So I took a just community college non-credit writing course, and I loved it. And then I decided to go from there, and went really slow. My kids were younger and I homeschooled them. So I wrote during soccer practice or lacrosse practice or,
Yeah.
whenever I could get a chance. But yeah, it was really when I was reading so much, I just fell in love with stories, and I just decided felt like I really wanted to be writing them.
I love that. And I think some of the best writers were
Hmm.
readers first, and it was that
Yes,
love of the
agreed.
story. And I also think it's fascinating how many of us at one point homeschooled as well.
Right?
And, and it was like we were doing all the things. We were
All the
reading,
things.
we were writing, we were
Yep.
homeschooling. Many of us had another job as well. And it's like we
Yep.
were just kind of cramming it in the
Yep.
cracks of the day.
Yes.
So when you think about your writing, what's one of your biggest challenges as an author?
That's a good question. I think for me, stories, I write, I've heard the term and I kind of share it with a couple author friends. I write instinctually or intuitively,
Mm,
like I don't plot out my stories. So the biggest challenge for me is multiple drafts. It's a
yeah,
long process. I wish I wrote faster. I wish I was a little more streamlined in how many drafts I write. But it's just the way that I write, God
yeah.
created me to write. So yes, I wish I wrote faster and not quite so many drafts to get to the story, but it's the way the process works for me. So I would say that's
Yeah.
really the biggest one.
And it does work for you. It just
Yeah.
takes
It
a
takes a
lot more.
lot of time. Yes.
Yeah. So what's the biggest joy then in the writing for you?
Oh, I love the beginning. I love the idea, before you
Mhm.
actually even really start writing, where you have all the possibilities and you just dreamt up the story and you're like, it's a blank slate. I could go anywhere
Yeah,
with it. And I think that's the most exciting part for me.
that's fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I've
Yeah.
got a couple of quicker questions for you.
Okay.
Um, so sweet or salty,
Sweet.
tea or coffee,
Coffee.
and how do you celebrate when you're done with a book?
So usually we go out for a nice dinner as a family. We pick a fun restaurant and we go out, and then I always buy myself a little treat. So I remember
Oh,
each book with something small that's in my office or something I've been wanting for a while. That's kind of the big thing.
I love it. And you're one of the few people who actually has something that you do. Most of us are like,
Really?
well, we take a day off and then we start the next one. So I
Right.
love it.
Yeah.
That's great
Yeah.
because we all need to be better at celebrating
Yes.
the completion of
Absolutely.
something. So
Yes.
that's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining me. It's always just so much fun to connect with you and to celebrate your books like One
Thank
Wrong Move. It's
you.
so good. So,
Oh,
so good.
thank you. Thanks for having me.